Super Neptunia RPG was released for the PS4 and Switch over a year ago, but it wasn't until recently that I had a chance to play it. Being a fan of the first Valkyrie Profile game and disappointed with Exist Archive, the spiritual successor created by the same devs, I was hoping Super Neptunia RPG would give me something similar to the Valkyrie Profile experience. It uses a similar gameplay formula to Valkyrie Profile, with its 2D dungeon exploration and combat controls using the face buttons to attack, so I was interested in seeing how they would incorporate this into their game. But I wasn't anticipating this to be the next Valkyrie Profile clone that takes my breath away. I knew what to expect before going in, as I have played a couple of other Neptunia games. It's not a game that takes itself seriously, which is one of the perks of this IP, and it definitely doesn't have a deep narrative like Valkyrie Profile does. It was just supposed to be a nice, light-hearted, and fun game with some Valkyrie Profile elements and the added silliness Neptunia games have. Even with curbed expectations, I was left disappointed in the whole experience. Level designs, exploration, combat, progression, characters, and the story were all lacking depth. At least with the story, my expectations were already set pretty low, even though I never had much of a problem with it before. I'm not the most up-to-date person with pop culture and gaming trends, so a lot of references escaped me. But it also shouldn't be the only thing holding the story together. Neptunia's strength in storytelling is its playfulness, and Super Neptunia RPG has that, breaking the fourth wall and even sometimes making fun of itself, giving me a few good laughs in the process. The story itself is also pretty ludicrous, but not in a bad way. Our heroines Neptune, Noir, Vert, and Blanc have lost their memory and embark on a journey to get them back. During their travels, they get involved in the conflicts between Bombix Mori, led by Philin, who is oppressing people to churn out 2D games while trying to get rid of 3D games. Their goal is to have 2D games reign supreme by making everyone else forget about 3D games. And thus our heroines also fight against Bombix Mori to bring back 3D games for everyone to enjoy. Even though I could get on board with this plot, it just didn't feel like it was executed well. The problem is it needs a strong cast to make it more interesting and the story progression more enjoyable. Some of the characters work well, like the 4 main protagonists who are still lovable and give the game its distinct over-the-top atmosphere. Neptune is still the Genki girl, Noir is the tsundere, Vert is a gaming addict, and Blanc still has moments where she goes from 0 to 100 in anger that surprises everybody. The supporting cast and antagonists don't work as well. They were all very one-dimensional and their quirks didn't appeal to me, so it made it difficult to have any feelings about them, let alone like them. For instance, the 3 musketeers Esther, Artie, and Pei were the elites of Bombix Mori, but they all just had one dominant trait. Esther was just a playful person who loved machines. Pei was overly devoted to Bombix Mori's leader, Philin, and Artie just cared about capturing Neptune. Their screen time was just devoted to that without much development. Philin is the only antagonist that gets more fleshed out, but her story just wasn't interesting and it was easy to figure out all the mysteries surrounding her background. Similarly, the supporting characters had very little to offer in terms of emotional commitment. The resistance leader Artisan, whose goal was to stop Bombix Mori, had no backstory and felt like she was only there to fill the role of having a resistance to fight against them. There was nothing really personal to make her more relatable. Chrome, a new playable character, did get more development like Philin did, but she was gone for most of the game and her personality was too dry to like. Characters like Compa and IF, who acted as supporting characters in previous Neptunia games, make their return and also have minor roles that don't add much. I could like the story if I gave it another chance after looking up all the references, but the gameplay isn't compelling enough to go through it a second time. The gameplay loop is a pretty generic 2D platformer with some RPG elements. When exploring, there are only a few directions to go: left, right, or up by jumping. New abilities get unlocked later, such as double jump and being able to summon a pudding that can increase the jump distance. But these abilities weren't fun new mechanics that I was excited to use. Instead, they just felt like skills I was missing the entire time. As I continued to explore new areas, cutscenes would also trigger, advancing the story along. But sometimes the cutscenes can be jarring since the characters don't always enter the scene from the direction I approach from. Monsters can also be found scattered throughout the level, and touching them will cause a battle to occur. Like exploration, combat lacks any depth to make it interesting. It uses a bit of the Valkyrie Profile formula, which I was looking forward to, but comes up short of everything. In combat, characters and enemies will have AP that builds up slowly over time that can be used to perform actions. Party members in combat can only attack by using one of the 4 face buttons corresponding to their character, and there is no other control over them. Sadly, combat has no feeling to it. Attacks lack any and all tactile feel. There is no hit stop, so there isn't any weight behind the attacks, and enemies respond with a very bland and generic flinch when getting hit. The same applies when enemies retaliate, leading to a very underwhelming battle experience. The one thing I did like about combat was gaining extra AP when hitting an enemy's weak point, basically allowing me to continuously attack. Combined with the turbo buttons, battles were quick and easy. And the reason I liked it so much was so that I could finish battles as fast as possible. And this means I use the same attacks and formations repeatedly, feeding more into the repetitiveness and shallowness of the game overall. Abusing an enemy's weakness also made boss battles very easy to finish, requiring little to no effort and felt no different than normal trash mob encounters. One thing that could have made combat a bit more interesting is seeing more break attacks, which is just a special attack that can be performed after a break meter gets filled. These were cool and powerful moves, but were rarely used since combat ends before the bar typically fills up. It also seemed like enemies didn't have access to this attack, which is a bit strange since it's not unusual for bosses to have some sort of super skill. If they did have it, they probably didn't get a chance to use it since combat ended pretty quickly anyway, but it would have been nice to make it more challenging and seeing some neat animations in the process. Overall, the gameplay uses a pretty basic formula without much interaction required from me, which is why I lost interest so fast. None of the mechanics added anything fun or rewarding to the experience. Side quests should have been a good distraction from this, giving me something different to do while I explored, but they had their own issues. My main problem is that they can be accepted when it's not completable yet. It's not really obvious either until every nook and cranny has been explored, which can take a bit of time. This happens often with the fetch quests, but hunt quests are the most annoying. One of the early game hunt quests requires double jump to reach the monster, but it isn't unlocked until around mid-game. Newer hunts also can't be accepted until the previous hunts are completed, so it bothered me that it felt like they should be doable, especially when I completely surpassed the recommended levels. The worst feeling is finally completing that hunt quest, only for the next subsequent hunt quests to be blocked off due to story events. The frustration of having to backtrack every time to complete a hunt quest is exacerbated by the small world, dull scenery, and lack of exploration mechanics. The assets and level designs did look good the first few times around, but it lost its grandeur real fast since there wasn't much variety. There was actually one level I really liked that referenced Super Mario. You could go under the pipes and there were a ton of references to its music, level design, and enemies. There was a Goomba version of an enemy, some of the blocks had question marks on it, and I could clip through a solid ceiling. But even though this was an amazing and cool reference, it still quickly got stale. As I explored the world, it didn't feel exciting, and I definitely wasn't immersed. There was something else missing that made the world feel dead. And that is the lack of engaging NPC interactions. There were a good amount of NPCs to talk to, whether in town or out in the wilderness, but they rarely talk outside of giving quests or saying the generic "this is a shop behind me" line. What made matters worse is that most of them didn't have any dialogue whatsoever and would give a text box of an ellipsis. It caused the experience to feel cheap and incomplete. A little variety in flavor dialogue, no matter how small it may be, would have helped to make the world feel a little bit more realistic and help draw me in. One of my biggest gripes is when talking to side quest NPCs who ask you to find them some items, and they won't reiterate where to go. The quest description would usually be helpful for this, but they don't say anything except how many of the items I have, which is 0. So I just had to run around everywhere until I found what I needed. Other than that, there was little to do overall in the game. Only one progression system was present, which was the equipment learning system. Weapons and accessories have abilities such as new attacks or combat bonuses that can be learned if enough experience is gained using that equipment. This is nothing new and works well enough in other games like Tales of Vesperia, but in Super Neptunia RPG, there is little joy to be experienced from learning new skills. After a certain number of battles, I would just navigate through the laggy UI and select the next piece of gear that has an ability I didn't learn. There was never a skill I was excited to use. Even after learning all the abilities I could, which happened during the endgame, There wasn't much post-game content besides a few hunts, so there isn't really any opportunity to use them. That covers everything I wanted to say about Super Neptunia RPG. It was supposed to be a light and fun game I was hoping to be able to get into, allowing me to take a break from the more heavy games requiring more commitment. But this is way too far on the opposite end. On one hand, I'm not savvy with all the pop culture and gaming references, but on the other, it shouldn't have really impeded my enjoyment of the game this much. And even if the story isn't to my liking, I can appreciate a game if it has strong gameplay elements. Neptunia games can have a lot going for it, but in this case, it didn't hit the mark. All the systems, gameplay components, story, and characters felt too shallow, making the game feel more like it was created out of obligation than passion. Super Neptunia RPG was a letdown, but I haven't lost hope in the series. I'm still interested in what they have in store for their next game, and wonder what adventures Neptune and her friends will get into next.